The samurai had one of the best marketing campaigns in history. They sold the world on this image of untouchable, honor-bound warriors floating above the foolishness of mortal men. But once you look past the slick armor and cool swords, you find a rulebook that seems to have been written by madmen, pranksters, and people who were just plain weird. Today, we're exposing 33 of the dumbest, most absurd, and downright baffling rules and rituals that governed Japan's most legendary warriors. The truth is far more ridiculous than you've been told. 1. Alright, picture a high-stakes boardroom pitch in feudal Japan. Some guy stands up and says, "Gentlemen, the future of military defense is a tactical battle balloon." That's the only way to explain the existence of the Horo. This was a giant silk bag, like a deflated party favor, that a samurai wore on his back. The so-called genius idea was that when he rode his horse into battle, the wind would inflate it, creating a personal airbag to deflect arrows. But what it actually did was turn Japan's most feared warriors into giant, clumsy, brightly colored targets. Instead of being a symbol of terror, you became an angry, inflatable bumblebee wobbling across the battlefield. It was a fashion statement that screamed, "Hey archers, look at me! I'm the guy in the giant puffy coat." The designer should have been forced to wear one into his next performance review. It wasn't just dumb, it was advanced, attention-grabbing dumb. 2. You'd think the most dangerous warrior in the room would also be the most agile. Well, you'd be dead wrong. In any formal setting, a samurai was forced to walk like a penguin who's just lost his car keys. This was all thanks to their formal pants, the hakama, which were so ridiculously long and restrictive they made normal steps physically impossible. The result was a slow, awkward, shuffling waddle. This was supposed to look graceful and dignified. Instead, it made Japan's deadliest men look like toddlers trying to walk in their dad's trousers. Imagine a warrior, trained to dispatch a man in seconds, but it takes him 5 minutes just to cross a room without tripping over his own clothes. The most dangerous man in Japan could be defeated by a single flight of stairs. It was the ultimate sacrifice of function for high-fashion absurdity. 3. Forget Instagram beauty filters. The samurai had a far more permanent and horrifying way to look good. They took one look at a beautiful smile with pearly white teeth and collectively decided, let's do the opposite of that. This was Ohaguro, the practice of deliberately blackening your teeth. To achieve this nightmarish look, they used a disgusting brew of iron filings and spices that reportedly smelled and tasted like a chemical fire. Why? Because a pitch-black grin was seen as the height of sophistication. It was a fashion commitment that permanently screamed, "I have made terrible life choices, but I am sticking with them." It's like getting a face tattoo, but for your mouth, ensuring you'd never be hired to do a toothpaste commercial for the rest of your life. 4. How did samurai keep their elaborate oiled topknots looking pristine? By rejecting the very concept of comfort. They didn't sleep on soft, fluffy pillows. Oh no, that would be too logical. Instead, they rested their necks on a takamakura, which was basically a small, decorative block of wood with a tiny cushion on top. It's less a pillow and more a personal neck torture device. The entire purpose was to elevate the head so the precious hairdo wouldn't touch anything and get messed up. It's the historical equivalent of sleeping bolt upright in a chair to not ruin your hair for picture day. Except they did it every single night. They prioritized their hairstyle over the basic human need to, not wake up with a crippling neck cramp. That's true dedication to fashion. 5. A samurai's training regimen was brutal, mastering the sword, archery, combat strategy, and flower arranging. I am not kidding. The gentle art of ikebana was a mandatory skill for these hardened warriors. The same hands that could grip a katana were expected to delicately trim a chrysanthemum to achieve perfect aesthetic harmony. Can you just imagine the drill sergeant? No, Toshiro. Your placement of that cherry blossom shows emotional hesitation. Drop and give me 50 push-ups, then contemplate the transient beauty of the lotus. It's a mind-boggling paradox. To become the ultimate killer, you first had to prove you could make a vase of flowers look really, really pretty. It's like finding out that all special forces are required to take up professional knitting. 6. You can forget about guard dogs or high-tech alarm systems. The samurai's greatest invention for home security was the tattletale floorboard. In their castles, they installed something called nightingale floors. These weren't accidentally squeaky. They were brilliantly engineered to chirp and sing with every single step. Special metal nails would rub against jackets in the floor, creating a sound that made sneaking around impossible. While it was a genius way to detect assassins, it also meant you couldn't get a glass of water at 2 a.m. without the floor broadcasting your movements to the entire fortress. The floor was always watching, and it was always snitching. It was a paranoid's dream and a ninja's worst nightmare. 7. Forget kale smoothies and goji berries. When a samurai warrior needed a real health kick, he turned to history's most insane superfood, powdered Egyptian mummies. Yes, you heard that correctly. For some reason, these warriors got it into their heads that eating the ground-up remains of long-dead pharaohs was the ultimate cure-all. Think of the sheer, unhinged logic here. They were importing ancient, dusty corpses from across the globe at enormous expense, purely for a post-battle snack. It's like a modern billionaire insisting his paper cuts can only be healed with dust from a Martian crater. This wasn't medicine. This was the most expensive and ghoulish placebo of all time. It gives a whole new meaning to "you are what you eat." 8. In modern warfare, a surprise attack is key. The samurai often preferred a different strategy, the heavily advertised attack. This was the tradition of Nanori, where a warrior would ride onto the battlefield, find a nice open space, and proceed to loudly announce his entire life story. He'd shout his full name, his noble titles, his family history, and a detailed list of his greatest accomplishments. All while the enemy army stood there, holding their bows, completely baffled. It was the medieval equivalent of stopping a gunfight to read your entire LinkedIn profile out loud. It was supposed to be honorable, but in reality, it was a suicidally terrible tactic that turned a fearsome warrior into the world's easiest, most stationary target. 9. If you thought gift-giving during the holidays was stressful, try doing it as a samurai. Getting a present for your boss wasn't just about finding the right thing. It was a social death trap where one wrong move could literally get you killed. It wasn't about the gift's value. No, the wrapping had to be the right color. The decorative knot had to be tied in a very specific, symbolic way. You had to present it with the correct posture at the correct time of day, while probably reciting a poem about the changing of the seasons. A mistake in any of these areas could be seen as a grave insult, an act of disrespect so profound that a duel to the death was the only logical next step. It turned a simple birthday gift into a life-or-death puzzle box of social anxiety. 10. Forget till death do us part. A samurai marriage contract had a much quicker exit clause. If a husband wanted a divorce, he didn't need lawyers or lengthy arguments. He just needed to write a mikudari han, a 3.5 lines divorce letter. That's it. He'd scribble this glorified post-it note of doom, hand it to his wife, and she was legally fired from the family. The half line is the most savage part. Whatever he had to say in that last bit wasn't even important enough for a full sentence. It's a level of cold, bureaucratic efficiency that is almost impressive. It's not you, it's me. And this legally binding note that says, "I'm done with you. Bye forever." 11. We all know that one person in a group project who does nothing and ruins the grade for everyone. Now, imagine that, but instead of a bad grade, the consequence is that your entire family gets wiped off the map. That was the samurai system of collective punishment. If a warrior committed a serious crime or messed up badly enough to be dishonored, he wasn't the only one who paid the price. His parents, his children, his siblings, everyone in his bloodline could be legally executed or exiled. This put an unimaginable amount of pressure on every samurai. Forgetting to bow correctly wasn't just embarrassing. It was a mistake that could get your sweet old grandmother in serious trouble. It was the ultimate "you're grounded" threat, but for your whole family tree. 12. The samurai were the elite of the elite. They were noble, powerful warriors, and they were often completely broke. Why? Because of one of the most baffling economic rules in history. Samurai were forbidden from making money. Engaging in commerce, running a business, or even farming was considered beneath their dignity. They were supposed to live off a stipend from their lord, which was often barely enough to survive. So you had this bizarre situation where a man who could slice you in half with a sword was also starving and couldn't even sell rice cakes to make rent without being dishonored. They were literally too proud to work, but not too proud to starve. It's the kind of financial planning that makes absolutely no sense on any planet. 13. In the samurai world, your personal honor was important, but your boss's honor was everything. You could probably get away with insulting a samurai's fighting skills or even his family. But if you dared to say one bad word about his lord, the daimyo, you were a dead man walking. Insulting the boss was seen as a direct personal attack on the samurai himself, and it required an immediate, violent, and usually fatal response. It was a bizarre hierarchy of offense where your own reputation was basically secondary to your CEO's. It's like getting into a sword fight because someone left a mean comment on your boss's Instagram post. Loyalty was not just expected, it was violently enforced. 14. Forget camouflage and blending in. The samurai looked at the concept of stealth, laughed, and decided to do the exact opposite. They turned feudal warfare into a glorious, violent form of cosplay. Instead of hiding, clans would plaster their family crest or mon on absolutely everything: their armor, their helmets, their giant banners, even their horses' saddles. Battles became a dazzling, chaotic fashion show of competing brand logos. There was zero element of surprise. You could see which team was coming from a mile away by their giant, colorful flags. It was less like a military engagement and more like a medieval Super Bowl, where both sides wore their brightest jerseys, and the goal was to literally dismantle the competition. 15. The samurai government was the ultimate nanny state, and it had strong opinions on everything, including how sad you were allowed to be. I'm talking about sumptuary laws that regulated funerals. The government literally dictated how much a family could spend on a funeral based on their social standing. If you were a lower-ranking samurai and you threw a funeral that was deemed too luxurious for your station, you could be severely punished. It was literally a crime to grieve too lavishly. Imagine a government official showing up at a wake with a clipboard and a calculator telling you, "Sorry, this coffin is above your grief pay grade. You're going to have to dial back the sadness." It's bureaucratic control at its most macabre and ridiculous. 16. We've all heard of haunted houses, but the samurai took it a step further and believed in haunted swords. It was a common superstition that a katana, once it had tasted blood, could develop a malevolent, thirsty spirit of its own. This ghostly presence would supposedly push its owner towards more and more violence, compelling him to fight and kill just to satisfy the blade's supernatural hunger. It's the most convenient excuse in history for being a violent maniac. "I'm sorry, officer, I didn't want to start that bar fight, but my sword was feeling a little parched." It's blaming your own anger issues on your possessed cutlery, taking "the devil made me do it" to a whole new, much sharper level. 17. The iconic samurai hairstyle, the Shaun Mage, looks incredibly cool and serious in movies. But let's be brutally honest about what it really was. A mandatory, sweaty, partially shaved comb-over. The whole point wasn't fashion. It was pure, uncomfortable function. Samurai shaved the tops of their heads to reduce the insane heat and itching that came from wearing a heavy helmet all day. Then, they grew the side hair long, oiled it up, and folded it forward into a weird little tail that sat on top of their bald pate. It was a bizarre mix of aggressive baldness and a tiny, sad ponytail. This hairstyle screamed, "I'm ready for battle, but I am also deeply concerned about proper helmet ventilation." It was the ultimate symbol of warrior status that also happened to be one of the weirdest haircuts ever invented by man. 18. The samurai battle mask, or menyo, was a masterpiece of psychological warfare, designed to look like a snarling demon from your worst nightmares. It was meant to strike pure terror into the hearts of their enemies. There was just one tiny, insignificant problem. They were almost impossible to see out of. In the noble quest to look as scary as possible, they sacrificed critical things like, peripheral vision. The ornate metalwork often blocked sightlines, and the tight design made it incredibly hard to breathe. So you had a warrior who looked like a literal monster from hell, but he was wheezing like he just ran up 3 flights of stairs and could be easily ambushed by anyone approaching him from the side. It was fashion over function, taken to its most lethal and idiotic extreme. 19. Imagine you're a samurai, you get into a tense duel, you reach for your trusty katana and it's not there. What do? Panic? Surrender? No, you pull out your fan. I'm not talking about a flimsy paper fan for a hot day. I'm talking about the Tessen, a heavy iron war fan specifically designed for smashing faces. This was the art of Tessen Jutsu, and it was completely real. Warriors would train to use this oversized metallic hand cooler to block sword strikes, break bones, and knock opponents unconscious. It was the original multi-tool. It could keep you cool while you waited for battle, and it could crack a man's skull in a pinch. It's the ultimate proof that in the right hands, literally anything can be a lethal weapon, even your grandmother's favorite accessory. 20. The samurai had a very strict social hierarchy. At the top, you had the emperor and the shogun. Just below them, the samurai's sword. And then, somewhere way down at the bottom of the list, you had the farmers who grew all the food. I am barely exaggerating. The katana was treated as a living entity with a soul, a divine object that demanded more respect than most human beings. Stepping over a sheathed sword was a grave insult. Touching another samurai's sword without explicit permission was a catastrophic social error. The blade had its own etiquette, its own personal space, and more social rights than the people who built the castles. The sword was the ultimate diva, a demanding metal celebrity that couldn't be disrespected. 21. The samurai had a simple rule for dealing with emotions. Don't have them. Or at least, never ever let anyone see them. The code of Bushido demanded extreme, almost robotic stoicism. Showing pain, fear, or even too much joy in public was considered a major sign of weakness and a disgrace to your warrior status. This applied even in the most insane situations. If you were badly wounded on the battlefield, you were expected to deal with it with quiet dignity. Making a big scene about it was considered poor form. It was the ultimate suck-it-up buttercup philosophy, where the ideal warrior was expected to face any situation with the same emotional expression he'd use while waiting for his rice to cook. 22. You might think that after mastering the sword and the art of war, a samurai's education was complete. You'd be wrong. He also had to prove his soul was pure by having perfect handwriting. The art of calligraphy, or shodo, was not just about writing. It was seen as a direct reflection of your character. A bold, fluid stroke showed a confident spirit. A hesitant or clumsy brushstroke revealed a flawed and weak personality. Your entire inner self was judged by how well you could draw a character. Imagine getting turned down for a promotion because your boss thought your handwriting looked a little morally questionable. For the samurai, your penmanship was a literal window to your soul, so you'd better not have a single sloppy character. 23. Just when you thought the samurai's list of required gentle hobbies was complete, we have the Incense Game. This wasn't just lighting a stick of nag shampoo to make the room smell nice. This was Kodo, the way of incense, an incredibly complex and refined game of, well, sniffing things. Participants would be given samples of rare and expensive aromatic woods, and they had to identify them by scent alone. It was an intellectual and sensory competition treated with the utmost seriousness. These are the same warriors who were trained for brutal combat, now sitting quietly in a room, deeply contemplating whether they were smelling sandalwood or a hint of aloes wood. It's another one of history's great paradoxes: part-time killer, full-time perfume critic. 24. Of all the mythical beasts in Japanese folklore, perhaps none is more bizarre than the Kappa. This was a creature described as a sort of turtle-duck-goblin hybrid with a water-filled bowl on its head. And the samurai, along with everyone else in Japan, were terrified of them. Why? Because the Kappa's favorite pastime was supposedly dragging people into rivers and ponds to steal their shirikodama, a mythical ball of spirit energy located, and I am not making this up, inside your butt. The only way to defeat a Kappa was to bow deeply to it. Being polite, the Kappa would have to bow back, spilling the water from its head and losing all its power. So the ultimate defense against this soul-stealing butt goblin was good manners. 25. If you think modern celebrity gossip is wild, it has nothing on samurai superstitions. One of the most widespread fears was of Kitsuni, which were mythical fox spirits. These weren't just ordinary foxes, they were magical tricksters that could shapeshift, usually into beautiful women, with the sole purpose of seducing and utterly ruining a powerful samurai. A warrior could spend his entire life training, only to lose everything, because he fell for a woman who was actually a fox in disguise. Imagine the paranoia this created. Is my new girlfriend a genuine human being? Or is she a nine-tailed fox who's going to steal my family's sacred sword and make me look like a fool? It adds a whole new layer of stress to dating. 26. The samurai lived by the sword, but they were also terrified of their own umbrellas. According to Japanese folklore, when a common household object reached its 100th birthday, it could come to life and become a spirit called a tsukumogami. This meant that your old, forgotten paper umbrella sitting in the corner could suddenly sprout an eye and a leg and hop around your house, possibly seeking revenge for years of neglect. The same went for old sandals, lanterns, and musical instruments. So, on top of worrying about ninjas and rival clans, a samurai also had to be wary of his own antique furniture staging a rebellion. It gives a whole new meaning to spring cleaning. 27. We all know the no shoes indoors rule is common in Japan, but the samurai took the concept of clean floors to a spiritual level. It wasn't just about not tracking mud inside, it was about not tracking the impurity of the outside world into a sacred indoor space. The ground outside was considered chaotic and dirty, both literally and spiritually. A samurai's home was a sanctuary of order. So, if a guest forgot to take off their sandals, it wasn't just a clumsy mistake. It was a profound act of disrespect, like walking into a church and spitting on the floor. It was a social error so significant it could damage relationships and honor, all because of some dirty footwear. 28. Forget dueling with swords. The real intellectual battlefield for samurai was poetry. Specifically, a form of collaborative poetry called renga. This was a game where one person would write the first 3 lines of a poem, and then another person would have to add the next 2 lines and so on, creating a long chain poem. But it was also a fierce competition. Your addition had to be clever, follow complex rules, and seamlessly connect to the previous lines. A clumsy or uninspired verse would bring you shame in front of your peers. These warriors would spend hours trying to outdo each other, with witty wordplay. It was a literary rap battle, but with more cherry blossoms and existential dread. 29. In feudal Japan, it wasn't just people who could be samurai. Sometimes a title and stipend were given to a mountain pass or a river. This was a practice where important strategic locations were granted a rank and an income, just like a human vassal. The local lord would then be responsible for managing this samurai landmark, using the funds for its upkeep. So you could have a situation where, on paper, a legendary warrior like Miyamoto Musashi might have the same social standing as a particularly important boulder. It's a level of bureaucracy so strange it's almost beautiful, a world where even inanimate objects could climb the corporate ladder. 30. The samurai were masters of warfare, but their understanding of medicine could be questionable. One of the most popular remedies for a variety of ailments was bear gallbladder. Yes, the dried bile of a bear was considered a miracle cure for everything from stomach aches to fevers. This stuff was incredibly expensive and highly sought after. Warriors would carry small pouches of it with them, ready to shave off a little bit, and take it with water at the first sign of trouble. While modern science has found some legitimate medicinal properties in bear bile, the idea of carrying around a dried-up internal organ as your go-to health supplement is a truly wild concept. 31. When a samurai wasn't fighting or writing poetry, he might be found enjoying another popular pastime, sumo wrestling. But it wasn't just a sport, it was a religious and military event. Early sumo matches were often brutal, no-holds-barred affairs, intended as a form of ritual entertainment for the gods. Powerful lords would sponsor their own giant wrestlers, and the matches were a way to show off their wealth and influence. For the samurai, it was the ultimate spectator sport, combining raw power, ancient ritual, and the simple joy of watching 2 enormous men try to throw each other out of a circle. 32. The samurai had an odd relationship with money, but they had an even odder one with debt. Being in debt was seen as a major source of dishonor. However, since many samurai were cash poor, they often had to borrow from the merchant class, whom they looked down on. This created a bizarre social dynamic where a powerful warrior might owe a huge sum of money to a humble rice merchant. To get out of this dishonorable situation, the government would occasionally issue a tokusere, a debt cancellation order. With the stroke of a pen, all samurai debts were simply erased. It was a get-out-of-jail-free card for bad financial planning, and it absolutely infuriated the merchants who lost everything. 33. And finally, let's talk about the samurai's relationship with dogs, specifically the Akita Inu. These magnificent dogs weren't just pets. They were symbols of status and were originally bred for hunting bears and wild boar alongside samurai. But during the Edo period, a shogun known for his love of dogs enacted some of the most bizarre animal protection laws in history. People were required to address dogs using honorific language. Harming a dog was a capital offense. Stray dogs were fed a diet of rice and dried fish at the government's expense. It was a time when a dog literally had more legal protections and a better diet than many of the human peasants. For the samurai, it was just one more strange rule in a world already full of them. 901. So, from tactical battle balloons to mummy medicine, it's clear the samurai followed a code that often valued tradition over common sense. Which brings me to my question for you. What is the one thing we do today that future generations will look back on as being just as dumb as a samurai's battle balloon? Drop your most savage example in the comments, and if you enjoyed this dose of historical madness, demolish that like button and subscribe for more.